And thank you, the Adapt Center and Trinity College Dublin. Don't panic is probably the best way to introduce me generally, especially if you're going to be talking about this kind of material. People do tend to get scared right off the bat, and I usually say, don't worry, it's going to get worse. By the way, I should tell you off the bat, yes, I'm from the United States. I didn't vote for Trump. Just want to get that worry out of your head. I'm not that much of a nihilist. Trump does appear somewhere, so that's my trigger warning. There will be an image of Trump somewhere in this talk. I've tried to hide it, so it wouldn't upset you too much. All right. So basically, the point of my talk is focusing on one specific issue that I see as sort of the dominant issue currently in technology, what I'm calling leisure as liberation. And basically my argument is that if you look at the current trajectory of technologies, you see more and more this theme as sort of the central theme driving what we consider to be progress, what we consider to be well, I guess what we want, which is worrying. I mean, you can see from, for example, the Google Home, which now is managing all of our tasks effortlessly, right? Which again raises this question, why? Why do we want this? I don't know if you've seen a commercial for this device yet, or any similar voice assistant. But it seems like even Google, even Amazon are finding it hard to defend the existence of this product. So you see in the commercial someone saying things like, okay, Google, turn off the lights. And they're like maybe 5 feet away. And it's this weird, like, isn't life great now that I don't have to reach across the room to turn off lights? Okay, Google, what's the weather outside? Oh my God, I just turned on Google. I was not prepared for that. All right. That seems almost like it was done by design. It wasn't. My favorite example is this lower left advertisement for the Roomba. If you're not familiar with the hockey puck vacuum robot. And it really does capture this idea of what they're selling, right? That the family is finally liberated to do what they've always wanted to do. That now they no longer have to be enslaved by the awful chore of cleaning your house. You can let this hockey puck slave do it for you. Even the dog can finally enjoy life again. Because of course dogs are afraid of vacuum cleaners, but not Roombas, I guess. And of course you also have the Amazon drone fleet, which will be over our skies any day now. My last book I talked a lot about drones, so I won't do that so much today. But it is an interesting question of how quickly we've commercialized weapons of war. So where am I going with all this? Well, what's interesting is the concept of leisure as liberation was certainly not created by the tech industry. In fact, you can find it, I suggest, all the way back in Aristotle, where Aristotle in his Politics tells us repeatedly that leisure is the end of life, leisure is the greatest thing in life. This is, of course, codes for justifying slavery, if that wasn't clear already. Sorry. So, basically, we can finally be allowed to be the humans we were supposed to be if slaves do all the work that we don't want to do, all the work that keeps us from being human. And of course, because for the Athenians, slaves weren't human, then this wasn't a problem. And what's interesting, of course, is that someone like Karl Marx also shares this idea. He just wants to expand upon it. So for Marx, the idea is that still it's through leisure that we are liberated, but the idea is that now why can't slaves as well as slave owners be liberated? And you get this idea, especially in this third quote, where he's describing what life in the communist society would be like, where it seems almost like he's describing Facebook's new virtual reality platform. That you can just try out different lifestyles and let society do all the hard work for you. And if it's not society, then it's Facebook. But it's still central planning does all the busy work, and then the rest of us are free to be real humans, right? So again, the question is, technology is clearly providing us with leisure, but is it actually providing us with liberation? Is there's an app for that, Zeitgeist, actually doing what we think it's doing? I have been told frequently that I sound very cynical when I talk about this. So I want to be clear that I'm open to the possibility that this isn't as bad as I'll make it sound. I'll leave that up for the Q&A if you want to defend there's an app for that philosophy. But I first of all don't want to be suggesting, one, that I'm deterministic, that I'm saying that we have no control, technology has already conquered us. I'm also not suggesting that I am somehow free of nihilism. And if anything, it's because I'm such a good nihilist that I'm able to recognize it so well everywhere I go. It was really everywhere in the airport just now. I feel like if I had forgotten my slides, I could have just taken some photos of the airport. It would have done just as well. So the structure of the talk is basically, I'm going to go through a little bit of philosophy of technology. I'll do a little bit of philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche, and then I'm going to try to marry the two into something like a Nietzschean philosophy of technology. And the reason for this, again, is because what Nietzsche was doing in the 19th century in Germany was trying to essentially diagnose what he saw as the ultimate sickness surrounding him. So he describes himself not as a philosopher, but a cultural physician. So you could also think of what we're doing today as sort of all of us are here to get our checkup. So how sick are we? That's the idea. So let's begin with human-technology relations. So when we talk about perspectives on technology, there's typically three overwhelming perspectives. On the one hand, you have, that's Heidegger, by the way, for those of you who can't read, that's my drawing, I apologize. I can't help myself sometimes. You have this sort of idea, the deterministic story, technology will take us over, technology will turn us all into batteries. We are there for technology, technology is not there for us, this kind of story. On the other hand, you have a much more optimistic, technophiliac approach. If you can't read, it says 2045, the year man becomes immortal. This is what has come to be known as transhumanism. There's even an episode of the new Bill Nye Saves the World where he discusses how technology can finally save us from awful things like people being born handicapped. The question of what that means for people who are currently handicapped, what that means for people who are born disabled, what that means to that community, not important. All that matters is that technology is curative, that technology is great. And the best part is, if there is a problem, like ableism, technology will just cure that too. In the middle is probably where you find most of us, where we just kind of accept that technology is part of the story of human evolution, and we don't really know how we feel about it. Is there anyone who has a fourth perspective I didn't capture? Is this more or less, you're somewhere on the spectrum? Yeah, okay. Now, what's interesting is, along comes a fourth perspective. The perspective perhaps most associated with the department I teach in. We found the most complicated word we could find, post-phenomenology, so that you can say I'm a post-phenomenologist. My philosophy is post-phenomenological. It's we're just really mean to our students. That's basically the idea. If you're not familiar with this image, this is the classic duck rabbit. I like Photoshop a little too much, so I turned it into the Matrix duck rabbit. But the duck rabbit captures this idea of how post-phenomenology approaches technology, which is that basically we can never define what technology is in advance. Technology is about the perspective of the person relating to it. So that much like how if I said, is it a duck or is it a rabbit? The answer is yes, the answer is no, and there is no right or wrong answer. That's really the way that they want to approach technology too. It's not that it's good, it's not that it's evil, and it's not that it's neither, and it's not that it's both. It's all of the above. So the simplest way to put this is that traditionally we tend to think of subject-object dualism. Subjects and objects exist independently of each other. So that I'm giving this lecture through PowerPoint has no bearing on me as a human being. It is merely a tool like a hammer. Post-phenomenology says, no, subjects and objects are not how we actually experience the world. How we experience the world is actually that we are related to each other. We are related to each other in this way that I like capturing through the fork, where we like to say, Wittgenstein, for example, it was his birthday the other day, so I feel like I have to sneak him in for some reason. Wittgenstein liked to say that language leads us to have certain philosophical positions, whether we're aware of it or not. So that we've named the fork a fork leads us to think that there is a thing called a fork. There's one way to use it, forking, and that a fork forks, and that if you don't fork properly, then you're forking wrong, right? I have a 3-year-old son, and it is instinctive for me to tell him frequently, you're forking wrong. But the idea here is, right, the fork does not exist outside of my relationship to it. I sound like Neo in the Matrix right now. There is no spoon, but I said there is no fork. But it's still this idea, if I'm eating a meal, then the fork and I constitute through the relation of the meal that I am an eater, it is a utensil. If, however, I am playing with it in some sort of a game, then we are constituted as player and toy. Similarly, if I want to murder someone, it's not that I am misusing the fork, but rather I am recognizing that it's a sharp implement that could be used for stabbing. And that this then reveals my own relationship to myself as murderer. So the idea here is there is no fork, and also there is no me outside of this relationship. This is the post-phenomenological standpoint. So if you understand multi-stability is just a fancy way of capturing this idea. That there are various stabilities, here are 3, that all of which are examples of how we can relate to just a simple technology like a piece of metal with 3 prongs at the end. Right? And if that's true of a fork, then imagine how much more true it is of an iPhone. Right? Now, what's interesting is Don Ivey, who is often credited with founding post-phenomenology, points out that it's not only that technologies help to define us and help to define our situation, but that they actually shape our situation. And in shaping their situation, they reveal something about us. Specifically, technologies mediate our relationship to the world. They come between me and the world. But that doesn't mean that I like that situation. He puts it nicely, I'm ambivalent about it. So essentially, this is captured perhaps most easily in this framework he provides us, where he says there's essentially 3 basic human-technology relations. They are all on the same spectrum, but they're from one end from a technology acting like me, to the other end, technology acting like an alien being. So the embodiment relation, the standard example is a pair of glasses. I see the world through my glasses, but I don't say that. I say I see the world. So the main function of an embodiment relation is that the technology disappears. And in fact, embodiment technology is the whole point, is that it's working well when I'm not aware of it. And it's in the breakdown situation that I have to become aware of it, like when I take off my glasses to clean them. And that's when I realize that the technology empowers me. It allows me to see things I couldn't see otherwise. But it also reduces me. Because as soon as the glasses are off, my eyesight is actually worse than it used to be before I started wearing glasses. The hermeneutic relation, hermeneutic is just a fancy word for interpretation. The hermeneutic relation is when basically the technology is some kind of reading technology. The technology, like for example, when you find out who won the election by looking at your phone. And you don't realize the degree to which the phone could be telling you a complete fiction. You trust the phone. You trust the computer. You trust the traffic light. All of these things are operating on faith, essentially. Because it's the technology that's now experiencing the world, not you. You're experiencing the technology experiencing the world. So on the one hand, it projects us. It allows us to experience things we never could have experienced otherwise. The classic example being 3 Mile Island, the nuclear power plant. where you could not control the nuclear power unless you had a computer and sensors that could relate to the nuclear rods. Because if a human was in there, you just die. The problem, of course, and this is why if you know 3 Mile Island, you probably know the word that follows it, disaster. The computer said everything was fine. The computer was wrong. So at the same time, we can also be betrayed by the technology. This is what, for example, Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook and Eric, we'll just call him Google, Eric Google, sorry. What they're trying to do now with the fake news problem, right? That because of our, let's call it hermeneutic faith, we trust what we read, right? So for example, my brother is a pediatrician, and he says the worst thing ever invented was WebMD because patients trust the phone more than they trust the doctor. Maybe you've done this too, where you go to a doctor, the doctor says you have a cough, drink some water, and you say, I have Ebola. It's very short about this, right? And then the alterity relation is again where it's most other. This is the example of Inception with the spinning top, where you become obsessed with the technology. You're very aware of the technology as a technology. So this allows us to have fun with technology. You see this with almost any demonstration of a robot, where we're very excited about a robot doing childlike things. But at the same time, it becomes a competitor. It reveals our love-hate relationship with the technology. If you've ever hit your laptop, for example. If you've ever, my favorite actually isn't when you hit the laptop, but when you angrily click. And you're like, I'm going to click really hard. And somehow like that extra pressure of the haptic technology will like really tell it to open the page. Right? So the idea here is fundamentally that I want to push is that because of our multi-stability, because of our relationship to technology being multi-stable, this opens up the door to it not just being ambivalent in a plus-minus situation, but also in a sense of how nihilism can come in here. And the question then of how Nietzsche and Heidi will come up, again, I'll return to this, but that's the setup. That's where I'm going with this. Is there anyone who hasn't heard of Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche? Anyone need a quick refresher? Born in 1844 to a Lutheran father who died at the age of 5. I'm not going to go through his whole life. That's not important. The most interesting aspect, actually, is he dies twice. He's one of the very few people who gets to die twice. 1889 in Turin, he sees a man flogging a horse. He screams, Ariadne, I love you, throws his arms around the horse, collapses on the ground. That's death 1. He then lingers on his couch of his sister. By the way, it's if you learned one thing today, outlive your siblings. Because if you've ever heard that Nietzsche is a Nazi philosopher, that's because his sister was married to a Nazi and she took control of his literary works. And she basically took a big fat black pen and crossed out things like when he says, I would gladly drown all the anti-Semites in the river. She just kind of crossed that part out, right? So again, big takeaway, outlive your siblings, right? So Nietzsche is the philosopher most credited often with nihilism, said things like God is dead. And the idea here is that in the most systematic work that he provides us, the genealogy of morals, I think he provides something like what I'm going to call human nihilism relations, similar to the human technology relations of post-phenomenology, that will allow us to merge the two. So he says, for example, in the opening of the genealogy, we are unknown to ourselves, we men of knowledge, and with good reason. We have never sought ourselves. How could it ever happen that we should ever find ourselves? It has rightly been said, where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Our treasure is where the beehives of our knowledge are. We are constantly making for them, being by nature winged creatures and honey-gatherers of the spirit. There is one thing alone we really care about from the heart, bringing something home. Whatever else there is in life, so-called experiences, which of us has sufficient earnestness for them, or sufficient time? So we are necessarily strangers to ourselves. We do not comprehend ourselves. We have to misunderstand ourselves. For us, the law, each is furthest from himself, applies to all eternity. We are not men of knowledge with respect to ourselves. I didn't intend to have so many Nietzsche quotes, but Nietzsche is just one of those guys, you kind of have to read it. I can't do justice to paraphrasing the poetry of Nietzsche. And especially just the rage. He's a polemical philosopher. So he's writing almost always as someone who's very upset, who's angry. But what's interesting is that at the same time, not unlike Kafka, famously thinking all of his books were really funny, Nietzsche describes himself as actually the only happy philosopher. So he says, my philosophy is a yes-saying philosophy. He says, I would only believe in a God who dances. So there is, interestingly, also a sort of ambivalence here. As negative as this all sounds, it still has sort of a positive message if we can unpack it. So what is he really saying here? Let me try to schematize it. He's basically saying we are necessarily strangers to ourselves for two reasons. On the one hand, we lack the time, right? He describes us as being like busy bees. This is essentially where he's agreeing with Aristotle and Marx. What's interesting is he adds an extra element. This is where he completely destroys leisure as liberation, where he completely destroys Aristotle and Marx. It's not only the problem of time, it's the problem of earnestness. I was going to start quoting the importance of being earnest, but I'm not going to do that to Oscar Wilde. So the idea here is, one of the questions people often ask Marxists, why hasn't the revolution happened yet? And that seems like a very good question, right? Marx, historical materialist, it's going to happen, right? And then we're sitting around waiting. It's been about 100 years or so since Marx was writing. Any day now, right? Like you have executives. I saw one this morning who complained to the Los Angeles Times, this company is again paying all the workers first. What about the shareholders? And we're just used to this, right? Again, you had recently United Airlines beating up a passenger and saying, well, if you read the contract, it said we're well within our right to treat you like luggage that needs to be discarded, right? And what's most fascinating for me, if you've seen the video of this passenger being, God, what was the word? De-embarked? They came up with some very Orwellian term for this. In the video, everyone else on board basically reacts the exact same way. They all take out their phone. Right? So you know, with some degree of confidence now, if you were to be attacked in public, that would be the version of help we give you now. Right? Like, don't worry, this will be on YouTube soon. Right? So what's interesting from a Nietzschean perspective, again, in this response to Marx, maybe the problem isn't only that we have a boss who alienates and oppresses us, but maybe the real problem is that we like having a boss. We want a boss. We like having someone to blame for being alienated. We like having someone to blame for being oppressed. In fact, the problem isn't that we don't have the time to do what we want, it's that we don't have the want to do what we have time for. I don't know if you've ever experienced this where you said, you know, if only I had some free time, I could finally do this project. I just have to get all this busy work done first. And then you get the busy work done too early, and you have to like go find more busy work, right? And this is why God invented Twitter, right? And again, it's this idea that I think Nietzsche really helps us to understand, that we make ourselves busy in order to avoid ourselves. That this is really our greatest superpower. So why? Why do we do this? I tried to make this as creepy and disturbing as possible, and I found fonts are really good for it. I didn't even know PowerPoint could do this. So basically, my answer, Nietzsche's answer, nihilism. So what is nihilism? Nihilism is the philosophy of who cares? Nothing matters. What's the big deal? Vote for Trump, vote for Hillary, it's all the same. You've probably heard that before, or whatever equivalent. This is also the same philosophy of people voting for Brexit and then spending the next day Googling what is Brexit. I knew that would get some reaction from the crowd. Yeah. So again, the idea here is that for Nietzsche, this is what is our everyday lives. Our everyday lives are nihilistic. We're constantly doing things to occupy our time, to fill our time, to give us something to do. right? When someone says, "What are you doing?" and you say nothing, that's not disturbing. That's just normal. Why? Right? When someone says, "I can't believe I just spent 10 hours watching this terrible TV show." Like, again, that's normal, not you should go see somebody. Like, that's a problem, right? So it's, again, this worrying trend that we spend as much time as we can doing as little as possible. That this is seen as really success. So, for example, Jerry Seinfeld, when he quit the TV show, his very first appearance after that on Letterman, his entire stand-up act that night was about the joy of doing nothing. And that was what he always said his TV show was about, right? And this is still the #1 sitcom in human history about nothing. The show about nothing, and we loved it. And we were mad there was not more of it, right? But it's okay, we have Modern Family, right? Still, we have various versions of nothing that we can sell. Or we have The Walking Dead, where we get very excited by people eating each other. And the weirdest thing about The Walking Dead from a Marxist perspective, of course, is that the zombies are the proletariat. The human survivors are the bourgeoisie. And you side with the bourgeoisie. Like, what are you doing here? Right? That's how your boss sees you, right? Mindless, just feed me, right? I want to eat you, right? That was Jonathan Swift, right? We just want to eat the rich because they were going to eat the poor. And we made a TV show about it and we get upset. Anyway, I get sidetracked by this, I apologize. I really hate The Walking Dead. So, Nietzsche says, we suffer from man. We are becoming thinner, more good-natured, more prudent, more comfortable, more mediocre, more indifferent, more Chinese, more Christian. There is no doubt that man is getting better all the time. And this is what's, I think, most important for how he relates to technology, is this idea that we are indeed getting better. There is surely progress. But what does that mean? What do we mean by better? We all take for granted that everything is getting better, life is improving. But compared to what? On what standard? On what value? Whose standards? Whose values? And perhaps most importantly from a Nietzschean perspective, to what end? What is the goal of all this better? Right? Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, the day they hit 1 billion active users, he said, this is part of our dream of making a better world. But he didn't have to define what that better world was. The better world just seems to be everyone on Facebook. But then what? Everyone sharing the same cat photo? I don't know what the better is there, right? And we just sort of leave that empty. Like, we'll figure that out when we get there, but we all know it's better. And perhaps most importantly is, again, this idea of we're just kind of sick of each other. And the example I like to think of, I think Nietzsche is kind of describing, it's as if we're never not on a New York City bus. We're all crammed into a tin can, desperately hoping nobody touches us. You see this when you get on the bus and someone plants their bag next to them, right? Like, I need this row, right? Like, I was just on a plane, and you know everyone sitting on the aisle is just like, come on, come on. And then someone sits next to you, and you just want to murder this person. Like, they seem perfectly nice, but they're taking elbow space. And we come up with, again, sunglasses, headphones. If someone could make headphones for the nose, I think that would be the next billion-dollar idea, right? Because really, we want technology to make us as disconnected as possible. And then we just redefine what connected is. So again, no touching, no seeing, no hearing, no smelling, definitely no tasting. I do not like people, right? We're very okay with this germophobic technological existence. This is what Nietzsche was already describing in the 19th century, and this is more or less the trajectory that technologies are getting us to today, right? You sit down on the train, and you just zone out in your little nirvana. This is, of course, what he means when he says more Chinese. He's referring specifically to Buddhism. That was one of his #1 concerns, was that as much as yoga has become a trend today, Buddhism was really trendy in his day. And this idea that if you just sat on a pillow doing nothing for as long as possible, that would be the best life. And today, we move off the pillow and bend ourselves into pretzels. But it's still this idea that doing nothing is the best something we can come up with. Right? So what's the relationship if we now return to ID? We see there are interesting parallels between how Nietzsche describes nihilism and how ID describes technology, specifically the idea that they both lack an essence. There is nothing that technology is. It cannot be defined in advance. And there's nothing that really we are as human beings that can be defined in advance. And in fact, for Nietzsche, that's our greatest problem. It's not just that technologies are multi-stable, we are too. We cannot tell in advance who or what we are going to become. That puts an incredible burden on us. A burden that we like having filled in by others as quickly as possible, right? Tell me what I am. You put yourself on a website to be told, what are you? You take the Facebook quiz, which Game of Thrones family are you? And then you get very excited, right? Which Harry Potter school would you belong to, right? We find personality quizzes, right? Are we from Mars? Are we from Venus? We're really good at seeking others telling us who and what we are. And of course, this goes back for Nietzsche to the church just telling us sinner. That's a really easy answer, sinner. Why? Because you're human, right? So again, if I have no essence and technology has no essence, what happens when we converge? Will technology finally overcome our nihilism, or will our nihilism overcome our technology? So what happens when we combine the two? This is what I'm trying to do in a book I'm writing right now. So this is all a work in progress. So in the Q&A, I hope you attack me as much as possible, and then I will steal your ideas and put them in the book. And then, that's technology for it. So Nietzsche tells us we are sick, we are depressed, we are exhausted. We really just don't like life anymore. And the role of the priest is to basically find ways to divert us, find ways to entertain us, find ways to keep us busy. Find ways, most importantly, to keep us, 1, from killing each other, 2, keep us from killing ourselves, and 3, most importantly probably, killing the priest. And he comes up with essentially 5 ways that we can do this in the 3rd essay of the genealogy. So I'm going to go through each of these 5 and try to see to what degree, in what ways, we can make this move. Are tech companies the modern day priests? Can we basically find examples of each version of this nihilistic strategy in the technologies we have today? Self-hypnosis. Nietzsche tells us that basically we have put a lot of energy into doing, again, as I've been saying, not only as little as possible, but actually into putting ourselves to sleep. We really want to sleep. Again, walking through the airport, they have these little beds that you can pay money to have like this sort of isolation chamber and just get a little nap. This is the dream, right? That's why you hope to make enough money to go to fly first class, so you can sleep on a plane, right? So again, it's this idea, like Buddhism, where we want to get into some sort of hypnotized, some sort of hibernation, some sort of meditative stance for as long as humanly possible. The hypnotic sense of nothing. And the reason for this, as he points out, is to get away from suffering, right? Feeling is suffering. Life is suffering. Pain is suffering. As much as we like to say we're afraid of death, as the Greek philosophers pointed out, we don't have an experience of death, but we do have an experience of pain. And pain really bothers us. And we want to get as little pain in our lives as possible. So part of putting ourselves to sleep is, again, to just basically stop ourselves from having to feel things all the time. Because feeling is really annoying, right? And ever since, at least in the United States, ever since Trump came into office, it's become more and more common for people to defend, 1, sleeping as much as possible, but 2, finding ways to distract yourself. And this is more and more being described as healthy. It's actually healthy to do what Nietzsche is describing as sick. So how do we do this today? Well, perhaps the best example of what I'm calling techno-hypnosis would of course be the television, which has existed since the caveman days. And what's interesting is it seems like our number one goal in life is to have as many screens as possible in as many places as possible. I want to never not be watching TV. Right? If I had Google Glass, I could be watching TV while talking to you right now. Right? And that's the dream. And all of you would be wearing Google Glasses, and all of you would be watching TV, and then afterwards we could find out what we were really doing while in theory we were talking to each other. Right? So we move from the prehistoric idea of having a room with a TV that is stationed in one area that you go to and sit with people, to finally I can go outside and watch TV, to finally I can drive and watch TV, till finally the Mark Zuckerberg version of utopia. This isn't as visible as I thought it would be, but basically it's a sea of white men on virtual reality devices. That's the utopia, right? Because again, as Nietzsche put it, it's not just no pain, it's also no women. And that's very, I cannot find a woman in this audience. So why do we do this? Again, the idea here is we want to be, as Nietzsche puts it, in another world. This world is pain, this world is suffering, this world is wrong. And this is again what we find not only in religion, but also even in philosophy. This is the first move of Plato, right? This is all cave, this is fake. There's a better world up there. And then the church said, you know what, that's a great story. Socrates sounds like Jesus, I like that, it all works. And you just change the good to the God, and it's the same story, right? There's a real world up there, the real world we find after death, and all of this is just a giant waiting room. And you just hope you get good magazines. What's interesting, of course, is that we used to be able to have imagination to transport ourselves into another world. So the question of why do we want augmented reality, why do we want virtual reality? Well, it seems like it's because, as for example David Hume and Sigmund Freud pointed out, our imagination is faulty. We don't actually have complete control of it. So aspects of the life that we're trying to get rid of keep coming back into imagination. So then we get TV. But TV is also faulty, because you have that annoying thing where occasionally you have to turn your head, occasionally you have to go to the bathroom, and if you don't remember to take your phone with you, and then sit there, right? Then you might actually have to look around, and that's awful, right? So virtual reality, you get 360 complete sensorial experience. You're finally enmeshed, and we finally have control. The one thing we never had. We had the ability to go into other worlds, but we couldn't control what the world was and how long we could be there. This was perhaps best captured if you've been watching Black Mirror, the season 4 episode San Junipero, right? That's our dream. We've replaced the heaven filled with clouds with a cloud-filled heaven, right? That's the idea. If I could just upload myself into the cloud, into a virtual reality designed by someone who has my best interest in mind, well, wouldn't that be the greatest life? And Facebook, as you might have noticed a couple weeks ago, just introduced their own new virtual reality platform, where finally we can like each other by doing this weird thing again. Right? I don't need the blue one anymore. So that's the first one. Mechanical activity. Self-hypnosis, Nietzsche actually says, at least you put some energy into it. At least you really worked hard becoming a Buddhist. At least you worked really hard learning yoga. At least you worked really hard in writing a TV show. But mechanical activity, it's one step even worse, because now we're trying to desperately occupy our time through rituals, through routine, through just doing the same damn thing over and over and over again. Right? Like I get really happy if I walk into a fast food place and they recognize me and they just say, "Do you want the usual?" Like this is my end my high point when I go out. If they know what I like, I don't have to look at the menu. I don't have to think about the menu. The menu is pain, right? This is why you do that weird thing when you ask the waiter or waitress, "What do you recommend?" As if their tongue and your tongue have anything to do with each other. Right? Like I used to work at a bookstore, and people would ask me, what should I read? And I found this really disturbing. But thankfully, I worked in New York City, where you were allowed to be rude to customers, so that wasn't a problem. But basically, the idea here is, this is the Protestant work ethic. That we find the blessings of work. If we can just finally always have something to do, always keep ourselves busy, then you never have to enter the pain that comes in through this very small consciousness, as he describes it, right? So we want absolute regularity, punctilious and unthinking obedience, a mode of life fixed once and for all, fully occupied time, a certain permission, indeed training for impersonality, for self-forgetfulness, for being cured of ourselves. In other words, we want algorithms. And again, if you think about Pokemon Go, I don't know, were people playing Pokemon Go in Dublin? Did you see this phenomenon of the lemmings walking through traffic? Right. In the Netherlands, this was really terrifying because they're riding bicycles while Pokemon going. And you have this story up here of people actually falling off a cliff, the ultimate lemming experience. In South Korea, they had to put up new traffic signs to stop people from walking into traffic. And of course, the sign was not for the pedestrian. They're not going to read the sign. It was for the driver to always be on the lookout for people who are playing Pokemon Go, right? And what's interesting, of course, is that it wasn't just the game developers who realized that people would go wherever Pokemon told them to. Criminals discovered this too. So people, this was like fast food mugging. I can just tell you where to go, you show up, I have a gun, give me your money, and then you go find your Pokemon somewhere else. And it's just like people are queuing up to be mugged by you. It's the perfect dream, right? On the other hand, we have algorithms, for example, like eHarmony that can tell us who to love. Amazon tells us what to think. Facebook tells us who to be friends with. LinkedIn tells us where to work. Algorithms, algorithms, algorithms. My favorite example is, of course, the Fitbit. The Fitbit, which is giving us this idea that basically all action is good, inaction is bad. In other words, be moving constantly and always be measuring it. You need that biofeedback loop. And what's probably most disturbing is this question of, am I moving because the Fitbit told me to? Like, who's really in control here? Again, like Pokemon Go, who's playing the game? Am I the controller or am I the avatar? Because Pokemon Go tells me to go somewhere and I go there. I've turned myself into Mario, essentially, right? And perhaps the most worrying example of this is the degree to which we're becoming very comfortable relying on algorithms to make just about every decision for us we can find. Hiring decisions, lending decisions. If you were tracking Trump's success with Cambridge Analytica, Steve Bannon was on the board of one of these big data companies. That was basically, this is one of the main things pundits ignored, right? So Hillary Clinton poured money into the traditional marketing venue of television, and Trump wasn't. And this was one of the signs that Trump was giving up. He didn't care. But what he was actually doing was pouring all this money into Facebook, and people weren't paying attention to that. And one of their favorite things, just to have the callback, if you liked The Walking Dead, you were going to get an ad for Trump. Because if your favorite way to relax is a post-apocalyptic hellscape where people eat each other, you're probably a Trump supporter. What's perhaps most worrying is that we do not know how the algorithms work, but we trust them. Or at the very least, we trust that someone knows how they work. But the people who design them, they don't really know how they work either. They know that an algorithm is a computer program with rules and instructions, but how it's following the rules, how it's following the instructions, we're not so sure about that. And you can't really just look into the device to figure it out, right? So like, for example, when Deep Blue went on Jeopardy, one of my favorite, there was, I can't remember it now. There was a question about a person. Which person was this? And Deep Blue's answer was, what is Toronto? And how on earth did Toronto enter Deep Blue's mind? Right? Because Deep Blue still destroyed the competitors by like 500,000 or something. But still, these random solutions would come up, and no one really could figure it out. And the developers at IBM had no idea how it came up. And now we have Deep Blue working on things like Alzheimer's. We have Deep Blue working on cancer treatments. So your cancer treatment might be the equivalent of what is Toronto. And that'll be okay, because it's just a statistical anomaly that we're working out. But again, if the algorithm tells you to do something, we do it. That's the word. Third, the petty pleasure. The pleasure of giving pleasure. This is where Nietzsche probably looks most cynical. But what's interesting is he's not that far off from Immanuel Kant here. When you help people, are you helping people for altruistic reasons, or are you helping people because it feels good? You've probably noticed this, for example, if you help someone and they don't say thank you and you get mad. Right? Like, I was supposed to get paid in a smile. I did not get that smile. Right? You also might see this, for example, if you ever hold the door. This especially happens in traditional gendered relationships. Man holds the door open for a woman, that's okay. But if the woman holds the door open for the man grabs the door. Right? Making very clear that what's helping is actually a power game. You've seen this before, right? Like if a woman pulled the chair up for a man, that we wouldn't know what to do at that point. Like what's happening, right? So the key here is this concept of will to power. This idea that in helping people, I get to prove that I have the power to help. And vice versa, I can reduce you. You're not just a needy person, you are needy. That is how I view you, your neediness. So how does that look today? As you might have already guessed, crowdfunding. Something that we used to find shameful, we today find uplifting. These stories that you see constantly flooding social networks. This person needed surgery and all these good Samaritans donated money to it. I needed help building a house. GoFundMe saved my life. These kinds of stories, right? These are, it says, over 780 million raised. And again, it's this weird question of why are we so excited to give away money? I could give you a very complicated story about that. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to skip that for the Q&A. But if you want to ask me, I have a fun story about pity sex we can discuss. So let's keep that. And speaking of pity sex, Tinder. This idea of reducing everybody to swipeability, right? And what's interesting is, looking at Tinder's own statistics that they provide on their website, swipes result in a match less than 2% of the time. And of that 2%, about 20% of people actually bother to send a message. Which then raises the question, what are you actually doing on Tinder? Because as much as it seems like a hookup app, it seems like it's really just a judgment app. I really just want to be able to just tell people that they're not attractive, not attractive, not attractive, not attractive. And again, you have this great, the gig economy. This was a real advertisement where we're really excited that we're working ourselves to death. This is beautiful. And then my favorite version of this, the hashtag Airbnb while black. This is part of the sharing economy, where you have this beautiful altruistic dream that we can finally do away with capitalism and we can just share with each other. And then lo and behold, we discover that we're actually using it in horribly racist and sexist ways. So it seems like, again, this idea that we're using it not to connect with each other, but to exercise our power over each other. This is perhaps the one Nietzsche's most famous for, the herd instinct. This idea that we are weak individually, so we are constantly seeking out as many people as possible. We're on a college campus. You tend to see this with first-year students. They tend to not go out at night unless they're in a pack. Right? It's like you're watching a nature special whenever they're roaming on campus together. Right? And of course, this is the easiest one to connect, Facebook. Facebook has become so normal that it's actually almost like a badge of honor when someone says, I'm not on Facebook. I always have one student in my class who has to make a big show of, I am not on Facebook. Of course, because of how Facebook works, you're probably on Facebook, and if you don't have a Facebook account, that just means you have even less control than the people who are on Facebook. Because people are posting photos of everybody. People are posting stories about everybody, so you're probably on there. So to be proud of not being on Facebook is just have even more pride of having no control over your life. The most interesting account is perhaps Oxford made the LOL emoji word of the year. This raised an outcry. Not that people were using emojis to that extent, but that emoji isn't a word. This created quite the linguistic fight. Oxford actually posted a very lengthy philosophical blog post on their website defending the idea. Another wrote, using the philosophy of Derrida, that the emoji is actually the truest language that's ever existed. And what's interesting, of course, is that emojis, they are indeed a language. I will not deny that. But they're a language of corporate logos. In the same way you can say Netflix and chill, and we know what you mean, but you're also advertising for Netflix. Emojis are not created by you. They're created by Unicode. You have no ability to create an emoji. You're using a corporately created emoji. And of course, you have to have a smartphone. You have to have an emojiable device to communicate through it. So it's very much embedded in a very corporate culture. There's a conformity behind the emoji. And of course, the trending on Twitter, which raises the question always, is what's trending because that's what people are talking about, or is it that people are talking about it because it's trending? And more often than not, when you look at what's trending on Twitter, people are tweeting about it, saying things like, why is this trending? Because they know that if you tweet about what's trending, you get more views. Which is part of this idea that as much as advertisers are using social networks to target us, more and more users are using social networks to act like advertisers. We want clickbait as much as they want clickbait. We want to be viewed as much as they want to be viewed. We want to create memes just as much as they want to create memes. We want followers. In other words, everyone has become a brand. And we even have websites telling you how to manage your life as a brand. This is who you are. And you can't go off message for fear that you'll lose your well-won following base. And then finally, this is the one Nietzsche was most worried about. This is the one that Nietzsche described as the guilty version of nihilism. He said the other four were relatively innocent. This is the bad one. This is where things get explosive. This is where things get violent. This is where things get destructive. And what's interesting for Nietzsche is that all that matters is that it's an emotional outburst. It doesn't matter if the emotion is positive or negative. All that matters is the outburst. And again, this is what the priests, he says, are able to figure out, that the best way to do this is through our sense of guilt. By driving us to have outbursts at very specific times in very specific ways. Yesterday, the Netherlands just did it with Koningsdag. This was a very specific, well-managed outburst. We all wear orange. You all get drunk and pee on the sidewalk, which is the definition of cynicism. But we all do it in a very controlled way, right? The technological equivalent, well, it's almost our latest art form is how can we harass each other online. Doxing, if you haven't heard of that, you're lucky. Swatting, again, if you haven't heard of that, you're lucky. This came up in what was known as hashtag Gamergate, or it was really about the ethics of gaming journalism, whatever you've heard. Hashtag Bring Back Our Girls, where you have even the First Lady of the United States entering into this meme. You have the Ashley Madison hack. You have Anonymous, which has become the internet's police force. And if you haven't noticed already, I did warn you, there is the Trump Pepe, which raises the ultimate question of, is Trump not the ultimate troll, but is electing Trump the ultimate troll? That this is just the greatest prank anyone's ever come up with yet. And we tried to get other countries to do it, right? Geert Wilders, that was supposed to be another one. Marine Le Pen, that was supposed to be another one. You got Theresa May. So at least we've got 2 countries who are in on the prank. No one else seems to be getting it yet. But we're really hoping this spreads like wildfire soon, right? But again, it's this idea, when you ask people, why did you support Trump? A very top answer was to piss off liberals. When you take political theory 101, they don't teach us that. But that seems to be more and more. And the polling didn't show it. And then they said, well, why did the polling not show it? And they said, because we lied to you. This was actually a Reddit thread, how to lie to the media when they ask you who you're voting for. So what do we do with all this? My suggestion is that responsibility is the answer to nihilism. And the way to understand this is to understand, on the one hand, how we get responsibility wrong, and on the other hand, how we can get it right. So first, how do we get it wrong? Nietzsche is helpful for this as well. Nietzsche tells us that one of the things we are most obsessed with, and this goes back to algorithmic predictability. If algorithms are able to predict our behavior, it's because we've made ourselves able to be predicted by an algorithm. My favorite example of this, if you've watched the BBC series Sherlock Holmes starring Benedict Cumberbatch. You've seen the show? Yeah. Benedict Cumberbatch, let's call him Cumber Holmes. Cumber Holmes is essentially the embodiment of big data. And he's the hero. He is immediately analyzing and predicting everyone's behavior, and we're really excited to find out about it. When you're watching it, you might even be wondering, I wonder what he'd say about me. He's kind of like the Jack Bauer of big data. In the same way that 24 pushed the propaganda of the war on terror through torture, we now get big data is awesome, you love it, and it's very attractive. And again, it's this idea, we are spontaneous creatures with free will. We shouldn't be predictable. Algorithms shouldn't work, and yet they do. This is what Nietzsche was concerned with way before algorithms, that we are really predictable, we are really regular, we are really calculable. And that this becomes our definition of what it means to be responsible. What it means to be responsible is to be accountable, which means that I can count on you. And the way I count on you is not by trusting you, that's ridiculous. I count on you because I know your routine. And I know your routine to the extent, and this bothers me more than anything, that it's become completely normal to say to someone, you're not acting like yourself today. And that's like a weird, like, oh no, what am I doing wrong? Oh, you're right, I usually sit here. This is one of my favorite things when teaching, is watching students go to the same seat. There is no assigned seating, but they do it themselves. And you actually get mad if someone else is sitting in your seat, and you want to be like this weird, like, that's my seat. What's interesting is that philosophers of technology, including those who have hired me, so I won't say too much about it, they're really big on this too. That we can use technology to better control, or sorry, make us better predictable. So for example, Madeline Ackrich says that technologies can be used like scripts that define or prescribe certain behaviors that we then subscribe to as users. Bruno Latour takes this up when he says that it's not that we're becoming less moral. It's that we're misunderstanding that morality is from both the human and the technology. So if humans are becoming worse, that's okay, because technologies are becoming better. So his favorite example is this, this very German story. There was a hotelier in Germany. He wanted the people staying at the hotel to lock the door behind them. So he put a sign on the door, please lock the door when you leave. Nobody locked the door. He then puts a little sign on each key, please lock the door. Nobody locked the door. He then put a really heavy thing with a sign on it, thinking, okay, you have to now. Nobody locked the door. So he went to a German engineer and he said, can you make a door such that people have to lock it? And this was the solution, a two-headed key. The only way to get your key back is to lock the door. So everyone starts locking the door. So now we're doing a good deed. But we're not doing the good deed because we're good, we're doing the good deed because it made us do it. Right? Same thing again with the speed bump. Obviously when you're driving through a school zone, you want to mow down as many children as possible. We get that. And so we put up a sign, slow, school zone, slow, children playing here. And we were like, haha, challenge accepted. So then we just said, how about we make the road such that it'll destroy your car? Because you might not care about people, but you probably care about your car. My own boss, so don't tell him I said this, Peter Paul Verbeek, is about how to use technologies and the fact that they mediate our experiences to help create what he calls the behavior that is desired from a social perspective. So in other words, using this framework, we can figure out how to implement specific technologies in specific contexts to bring about certain behaviors. So for example, on Facebook, if you're using posts in the way that does not agree with the terms of service, then you just get kicked off. Right? So this is a decisive, strong behavior. Right? You have no choice. It's gone. This is the same way when I try to leave the train station in Enschede without putting in my ticket. Sorry. When I try to leave the train station without tapping out, the doors won't open. So you have to pay. And what's interesting is the way they sell this, they don't sell it as, I don't trust you, you're a thief. They sell it as, don't forget. So it's just a helpful reminder to not steal from the government. But it's still the same message. You're not leaving here until you pay. We're not asking you, we're telling you. And we use technology more and more to tell, not to ask. But is this really what we want? Is this really what we mean by having responsible users? Is this really what we mean by having responsible citizens? So what does Nietzsche tell us responsibility should be? This is his answer. His answer is that we should be responsible in an existential sense. Responsibility isn't something you do, it's something you are. What it means to be a responsible person. What it means to be responsible, most fundamentally for Nietzsche, comes through his, again, most quoted phrase, God is dead. If God is dead, then there is no source of values outside of you. You are the source of values. That's what it means to be responsible. If I do something, it's because I decided it. And I own that. I do not blame anyone. I do not blame technology. And it's very important, I did not come here to say this is how technologies are ruining our lives. No, it's the opposite. This is how our lives are ruining technologies. We keep developing technologies that could be used for liberating purposes. And then we instead find the most nihilistic ways to reappropriate. So the problem isn't technologies, the problem is us. And the problem is our unwillingness to be responsible. This is what we need to learn. This is what we need to figure out. I apologize to my former colleague Johnny. So how do we cope with the idea that Google is the new God? We like saying that we're entering a more secular, more atheistic age. Nothing could be further from the truth. God is more powerful now than ever because God is technology. We believe in technology. So how do we instead believe in us? That's the real question.